My name is Cassandra Mitchell, and I'm 29 years old. Last Tuesday evening changed everything when my dad forgot to hang up his phone call. I heard every single word he said about me to my Uncle Frank. "She's such a burden, Frank. I can't wait to get rid of her." The words hit me like a physical blow. For 5 years, I'd been paying our mortgage, utilities, and groceries because I believed my father was financially struggling after Mom's death. I sacrificed everything, working 2 jobs to keep us afloat. But that phone call revealed the truth. Before we dive into this incredible story of betrayal and revenge, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. If you're ready to hear how I turned the tables on my manipulative father, please hit that like button and subscribe for more shocking family drama stories. Trust me, you won't believe what happened next. The story begins 13 years ago when I lost my mother to cancer. I was only 16, devastated and completely dependent on my father, Robert Mitchell, for everything. Dad painted himself as a broken man, struggling to make ends meet after Mom's medical bills supposedly drained our savings. He told me repeatedly that we were living paycheck to paycheck, barely scraping by. Like any devoted daughter, I wanted to help my grieving father however I could. After graduating high school, I immediately started working full-time instead of going to college. Dad claimed he couldn't afford to send me, and I believed him completely. By the time I turned 24, I had taken over paying the mortgage on our 3-bedroom house in suburban Ohio. Dad explained that his back injury from his construction job had left him unable to work, and disability payments weren't enough to cover our expenses. I trusted him implicitly because he was my father, my only remaining family. For 5 long years, I worked as a marketing coordinator during the day and waited tables 3 nights a week at a local restaurant. Every penny of my hard-earned money went toward keeping our household running. I paid the $1,500 monthly mortgage, the utility bills that averaged $300, and our grocery bill of about $400 monthly. I bought Dad's medications, his doctor visit copays, even his cigarettes and beer. Meanwhile, I lived like a pauper, wearing second-hand clothes and never spending money on myself. Dad played his role perfectly. He'd shuffle around the house in old clothes, complaining about his back pain and lamenting our financial struggles. He'd apologize for being such a burden, saying he wished he could contribute more. Sometimes he'd even tear up when discussing our money problems, making me feel guilty for any small purchases I made for myself. I genuinely believe I was the only thing standing between my father and homelessness. That Tuesday evening, I came home from my restaurant job around 10:30 p.m., exhausted and smelling like French fries. Dad was in his bedroom with the door closed, talking on the phone. I assumed he was speaking with one of his few friends about his usual complaints regarding his health and our finances. I went to the kitchen to grab a glass of water before heading to bed. That's when I heard my name through his bedroom door. Something in his tone made me pause and listen more carefully. What I heard next would shatter my entire world and everything I thought I knew about my father. "Frank, I'm telling you, this plan is foolproof," Dad was saying, his voice completely different from his usual tired, pained tone. He sounded energetic, almost excited. "Cassie has no idea I've got over $200,000 sitting in that account. She's been paying for everything like a good little worker bee for years now." My blood ran cold. I pressed my ear against the door, my heart pounding so hard I was afraid he might hear it. "The best part is, she actually believes I'm broke," Dad continued, laughing in a way I'd never heard before. It was cruel, mocking. "Patricia thinks I should have dumped this burden years ago, but I told her the free ride was too good to give up. Why pay for anything when your gullible daughter will do it for you?" Patricia. I'd never heard that name before. Who was Patricia? "We're listing the house next week for $980,000. After I kick Cassie out, Patricia and I are taking that money and buying a place in Florida. Maybe a nice condo near the beach. Patricia's already found one she likes for $600,000, so we'll have plenty left over for travel and retirement. The room started spinning. I grabbed the doorframe to steady myself as Uncle Frank's voice came through the phone, though I couldn't make out his exact words. No, Cassie won't be a problem," Dad assured him. "She's too stupid to figure any of this out until it's too late. I've got her convinced that I'm practically an invalid who can barely afford groceries. She actually apologized to me last week for buying herself a $20 sweater. Can you believe that?" Their laughter echoed through the thin bedroom door, each chuckle feeling like a knife twisting in my chest. This was my father, the man I'd sacrificed everything for, calling me stupid and gullible to his brother. The man I'd worked myself to exhaustion for, describing me as a burden he couldn't wait to eliminate. "Patricia keeps asking when I'm going to grow a backbone and tell Cassie to find her own place," Dad continued. "I told her after the house sale goes through. Give Cassie 30 days notice and let her figure it out. Not my problem anymore." I stood frozen in that hallway for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, processing the magnitude of his betrayal. 5 years of my life, given freely out of love and duty, had been nothing more than a convenient arrangement for him. Every sacrifice I'd made, every luxury I'd denied myself, every exhausted night falling asleep at my restaurant job because I was working myself to death to support us, it had all been based on lies. The conversation continued, but I couldn't bear to hear any more. I stumbled to my bedroom, closed the door quietly, and collapsed on my bed. The tears came then, hot and angry and filled with a grief deeper than when Mom died. At least when Mom passed away, I knew she had loved me. This betrayal cut so much deeper because it was intentional, calculated, and had been going on for years. As I lay there crying, one thought kept repeating in my mind: if Dad wanted to play games, I was about to show him that I could play them better than he ever imagined. The next morning, I called in sick to both my jobs for the first time in years. Dad seemed pleased that I was staying home, probably thinking I'd clean the house or run errands for him as usual. Instead, I began the most important investigation of my life. While Dad went out for what he claimed was a physical therapy appointment, I started digging into his real financial situation. I knew Dad kept important papers in the filing cabinet in his bedroom closet. For years, he'd told me those files contained only medical records and old bills, nothing I needed to worry about. Now I realized he'd been hiding his true assets from me all along. With shaking hands, I opened the cabinet and began searching through folders. What I found made my stomach turn. Bank statements from 3 different accounts I'd never known existed, showing balances that totaled over $250,000. Investment portfolio statements indicating another $100,000 in stocks and mutual funds. Insurance policies I'd never heard of, including one on Mom's life that had paid out $80,000 after her death. Dad had been anything but broke. The bank statements told a story of deliberate deception. Regular deposits from disability payments, Social Security, and investment dividends created a steady income stream. But more disturbing were the luxury purchases I discovered. Expensive dinners at upscale restaurants, hotel stays at beach resorts, jewelry purchases from high-end stores. While I'd been eating ramen noodles and wearing clothes from thrift stores, my father had been living like a wealthy man behind my back. Then I found the photos that made everything click into place. Printed pictures tucked inside a manila envelope showed Dad with an attractive blonde woman who appeared to be in her early 50s. They were on a beach somewhere tropical, both wearing expensive-looking swimwear and designer sunglasses. Other photos showed them at fancy restaurants, in what looked like a luxury hotel room, and touring what appeared to be expensive condos. The woman had to be Patricia, the mysterious person Dad had mentioned during his phone conversation with Uncle Frank. I found a handwritten note in her flowing script tucked behind the photos. "Robert, darling, I can't wait until we can be together full-time. That condo in Sarasota is perfect for us. Just get rid of your daughter problem and we can start our real life together. All my love, Patricia." My hands trembled as I read her words. Get rid of your daughter problem. That's how this woman saw me, as a problem to be eliminated. And my father, the man who'd raised me and claimed to love me, apparently agreed with her assessment. I continued searching and found a folder labeled house sale containing documents that made my blood boil. A real estate listing had already been prepared, describing our family home as a charming 3-bedroom colonial in a desirable neighborhood. The asking price was listed as $980,000, exactly what I'd heard Dad mention on the phone. But the most shocking discovery was a purchase agreement, already signed, with a closing date just 2 weeks away. The buyer's name on the contract was Franklin Mitchell Properties LLC. I stared at that name for a long moment before it hit me. Franklin Mitchell was Uncle Frank's full name. Dad wasn't selling to a random buyer. He was selling to his own brother, which meant this was an even bigger conspiracy than I'd initially realized. I photographed every document with my phone, creating evidence of Dad's deception and hidden wealth. As I worked, I tried to calculate how much money I'd given him over the past 5 years. Between mortgage payments, utilities, groceries, his medical expenses, and countless other bills, I estimated I'd contributed over $90,000 to our household. Money I could have saved for college, used for a down payment on my own home, or invested for my future. When I'd gathered all the evidence I could find, I decided to verify some facts with the one neighbor who'd known our family for years. Mrs. Henderson lived 2 houses down and had been friends with my mother. If anyone might know about Dad's secret life, it would be her. I walked over to Mrs. Henderson's house that afternoon, my stomach churning with anxiety about what else I might discover. She invited me in for tea, commenting that I looked pale and stressed. After some small talk, I carefully brought up my father's financial situation, mentioning how hard things had been since Mom's death. Mrs. Henderson's expression changed immediately. She looked uncomfortable, almost guilty. "Oh honey," she said softly, "I thought you knew." "Knew what?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. She hesitated for a long moment before continuing. "Your father has been. Well, he's been telling the neighbors for months about how he's got you wrapped around his little finger. He said you pay for everything while he lives off his investments and disability checks. He seemed proud of it, actually." The betrayal cut deeper with each word. Not only had Dad been lying to me, he'd been bragging about it to our neighbors. I was the neighborhood joke, the gullible daughter who worked herself to death for a father who was secretly wealthy. "There's more, Mrs. Henderson continued reluctantly. He's been bringing a woman around when you're at work. They act like they own the place, making plans to redecorate and talking about selling the house. She's quite rude, actually. Last week, she told me that your father was finally going to dump the deadweight and move on with his life. I felt sick. This Patricia woman had been in my home, in the house I'd been paying for, planning my father's future while discussing my elimination. She'd been walking through rooms I cleaned, eating food I bought, and plotting to kick me out of the only home I'd known since childhood. Mrs. Henderson reached across the table and took my hand. "Honey, I'm so sorry. I thought about saying something before, but I wasn't sure if it was my place. Your father made it sound like you were in on some kind of arrangement." I thanked Mrs. Henderson and walked home in a daze, my mind racing with plans for confrontation and revenge. Dad's car was in the driveway when I returned, which meant he was back from his physical therapy appointment. Or more likely, back from his date with Patricia. I had to decide how to handle this explosive information, knowing that my next moves would determine whether I'd be a victim or a victor in this family war. That evening, as Dad sat in his recliner watching television and complaining about his back pain, I studied his face carefully. How had I never noticed the deception before? The way his pain seemed to disappear when he thought I wasn't looking? How he never seemed tired despite claiming to be exhausted all the time. I'd been so focused on being a good daughter that I'd missed all the signs of his elaborate performance. As I went to bed that night, I began formulating a plan. If Dad wanted to play games with my life and future, I was prepared to show him that two could play at that game. But I wouldn't just be playing to win. I'd be playing for everything. The next morning, Dad left the house early, claiming he had a doctor's appointment in the city. Based on my recent discoveries, I was certain he was actually meeting Patricia for another day of luxury planning funded by my hard work. I used his absence to prepare for the confrontation I knew was coming. I organized all the photographic evidence on my phone and rehearsed what I wanted to say. When Dad returned home around 4 p.m., he looked happier and more relaxed than I'd seen him in months. His clothes were nicer than his usual around-the-house attire, and I caught a whiff of expensive cologne. For a man who claimed to be broke and in constant pain, he certainly seemed to be taking good care of himself. "Dad," I said, keeping my voice steady, "we need to talk." He looked surprised by my serious tone. "What about, sweetie? Everything okay?" I took a deep breath and decided to start with what I'd overheard. "Last night, I heard your phone conversation with Uncle Frank. You forgot to hang up properly." The color drained from his face, but he tried to maintain his composure. "I don't know what you think you heard, but..." "I heard you call me a burden," I interrupted, my voice getting stronger. "I heard you talking about your secret bank accounts with over $200,000. I heard you discussing Patricia and your plans to sell this house for $980,000. Dad's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. For a moment, he seemed genuinely panicked. Then something shifted in his expression, and I saw a coldness I'd never noticed before. "So what if I did?" he said, his voice losing all pretense of weakness. "This is my house, Cassie. I can sell it whenever I want to whoever I want. You're 29 years old. It's time you started taking care of yourself instead of mooching off your old man." The audacity of his response left me speechless for a moment. "Mooching off you?" "Dad, I've been paying for everything for 5 years. I've given you over $90,000 because I thought you were broke." He actually laughed at that. "And that was very nice of you. Considerate rent for living in my house all these years. But Patricia and I have decided it's time for a change." "Patricia?" I demanded. "Who is this woman you've been hiding from me?" Before Dad could answer, I heard a car door slam outside. Through the front window, I saw an expensive-looking silver BMW in our driveway. A tall, blonde woman in designer clothes was walking toward our front door carrying several shopping bags. "Perfect timing," Dad said with a smile that looked nothing like the loving father I thought I knew. "Cassie, meet Patricia." The front door opened without a knock, and the woman from the photos walked into our living room like she owned the place. She was probably in her early 50s, well maintained in the way that suggested expensive beauty treatments, and she looked at me with barely concealed disgust. "Robert, darling," she said, giving Dad a kiss that made my stomach turn, "is this the daughter you've been telling me about?" "Patricia, this is Cassie," Dad said, his arm around this stranger's waist. "Cassie, Patricia is going to be my wife." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Your wife?" Patricia smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "We're getting married next month, after this house situation gets resolved. I hope you understand that Robert and I need our privacy to start our new life together." I looked back and forth between them, trying to process what was happening. "House situation? This is my home. I've been paying the mortgage for years." "Actually," Patricia said, opening her expensive purse and pulling out some papers, "that's something we need to discuss. Robert has been far too generous with you, and I think it's time for some changes." She handed me a document that made my blood run cold. It was an official 30-day notice to quit the premises, dated for today. Dad had planned this ambush, probably with Patricia coaching him on exactly what to say. "You're evicting me?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "We're giving you a month to find your own place," Dad said, though he wouldn't meet my eyes. "That's more than fair. Most people get kicked out immediately." "Kicked out of the house I've been paying for?" My voice was rising now, anger overriding shock. Dad, I've sacrificed everything for you. I've worked myself to exhaustion to keep us afloat because I thought you needed me. Patricia laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Oh honey, Robert hasn't needed your help in years. He's been living quite comfortably on his investments and disability payments. You've just been extra income. Extra income? I repeated, the words barely making sense. Think of it as payment for room and board, Dad said, finally looking at me directly. You've been living here rent-free for years. Consider all those mortgage payments as back rent. I stared at him, searching his face for any sign of the father who'd raised me, who'd comforted me when Mom died, who'd told me we were a team facing the world together. But that man seemed to have vanished, replaced by a stranger who looked at me like I was an inconvenience to be handled. Patricia stepped closer, her voice dropping to what she probably thought was a confidential tone. Listen, Cassie, I'm going to be frank with you. Robert and I are in love, and we want to start our life together without complications. You're a grown woman, and it's time you learned to stand on your own feet. Complications? I asked. Well, let's be honest, Patricia continued, her tone becoming more condescending. You're nearly 30 and you're still living with your father. You work 2 entry-level jobs and have no real career prospects. You dress like you shop at thrift stores, and frankly, you're not exactly what anyone would call attractive. Robert feels sorry for you, but he can't be responsible for your failures forever. Each word was carefully chosen to wound, and they hit their mark perfectly. I felt tears starting to form, but I refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing me cry. Dad should have defended me. Any loving father would have shut down those cruel comments immediately. Instead, he nodded along with Patricia's assessment of my life. Patricia's right, he said quietly. I've enabled your dependence on me for too long. It's time for some tough love. Tough love? I asked, incredulous. This isn't tough love, Dad. This is abandonment. Patricia pulled out her phone and showed me photos of a luxury condo with beach views. This is where Robert and I will be living after we sell this place. 2 bedrooms, ocean views, a pool, and a clubhouse. It's exactly what we've dreamed of for our retirement. Our retirement that I've been funding, I said bitterly. Oh please, Patricia scoffed. You act like you're some kind of martyr. You've been getting free housing, utilities, and food. Most people would consider that a pretty good deal. I realized then that there was no reasoning with them, no appealing to Dad's better nature or sense of fairness. This had been planned and rehearsed, probably with Patricia coaching Dad on how to handle my inevitable emotional response. Fine, I said, standing up straighter. You want me gone in 30 days? I'll be gone. But don't expect me to just disappear quietly. Dad looked almost relieved that I wasn't going to fight the eviction. I'm glad you're being reasonable about this, Cassie. I was worried you might make this difficult. Patricia smiled triumphantly. I told Robert you'd be mature about this once you understood the situation. Most daughters would want their fathers to be happy. As they began discussing their moving plans as if I'd already left, I realized that this betrayal was even worse than I'd initially thought. They hadn't just decided to kick me out. They'd been planning this for months, maybe even years, while I worked myself to exhaustion supporting Dad's lifestyle. Every kind word, every expression of gratitude, every moment when Dad had seemed like a loving father had been an act designed to keep me paying his bills. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They assumed I was as weak and helpless as they'd convinced me I was. They had no idea that the daughter they'd underestimated was about to become their worst nightmare. That night, after Patricia finally left and Dad retreated to his bedroom with a satisfied smile, I sat in the living room planning my next move. I knew I needed help navigating the legal and financial complexities of what Dad and Patricia had done to me. My first call was to Uncle Frank, Dad's brother, hoping he might be a voice of reason in this family crisis. Uncle Frank, I said when he answered, I need to talk to you about Dad and this house sale situation. There was a long pause before he responded. Cassie, I was wondering when you'd call. Your father mentioned you two had a little disagreement about his plans. A disagreement? I asked, shocked by his casual tone. Uncle Frank, Dad has been lying to me for years about his financial situation. He's been making me pay for everything while he hides hundreds of thousands of dollars from me. Well, Uncle Frank said slowly, Bob's always been smart with money. Maybe smarter than you realized. Something in his tone made my stomach drop. You knew, didn't you? You knew about his secret accounts and his girlfriend and his plans to kick me out. Uncle Frank sighed. Cassie, honey, your dad's been talking to me for months about his situation with you. He feels trapped, supporting a grown daughter who should be taking care of herself by now. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Supporting me? Uncle Frank, I've been supporting him. I pay the mortgage, utilities, groceries, everything. And he provides you with a place to live, Frank replied. Look, sweetheart, I know this is hard to hear, but your father deserves to be happy. He's found a nice woman who makes him feel young again. You can't expect him to put his life on hold forever just because you haven't figured out how to be independent. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. Uncle Frank wasn't just aware of Dad's deception, he was actively supporting it. Uncle Frank, I trusted you. I thought you cared about me. I do care about you, he said, but his tone suggested otherwise. That's why I'm telling you the truth instead of sugarcoating it. Your dad has been too nice to you for too long. Someone needs to give you a reality check. Too nice? I asked, my voice rising. He's been stealing from me. Stealing? Frank laughed. Cassie, you've been living in his house, eating his food, using his utilities. If anything, you still owe him money. Bob could have charged you market rate rent all these years, but he didn't. I realized that Uncle Frank had been thoroughly poisoned against me, probably by months or years of Dad's manipulative stories. There was no point in continuing this conversation. I can't believe you're taking his side in this, I said. There are no sides, Cassie, Frank replied. There's just a father trying to move on with his life and a daughter who needs to grow up and move out. After hanging up, I felt more alone than ever. The two men I'd trusted most in the world had conspired against me, making me feel like I was the unreasonable one for expecting basic honesty and fairness. The next morning, I called the family lawyer who'd handled Mom's estate, hoping to get some professional advice about my legal options. Harold Rodriguez had always seemed kind and ethical, and I trusted that he'd give me honest guidance about whether I had any rights regarding the house. Mr. Rodriguez, I explained over the phone, my father is selling our family home and giving me 30 days notice to move out, even though I've been paying the mortgage for 5 years. That's concerning, Cassie, he said, his voice immediately serious. Can you come in this afternoon? This situation sounds more complicated than it should be. When I met with Mr. Rodriguez that afternoon, I brought all the evidence I'd gathered. Bank statements, photos, the eviction notice, and documentation of my mortgage payments. He listened carefully as I explained everything, occasionally asking clarifying questions or requesting to see specific documents. Cassie, he said when I'd finished, I have to be honest with you. From a legal standpoint, your father does own this house. Your mortgage payments, while generous, don't give you ownership rights unless there was a formal agreement establishing your interest in the property. My heart sank. So I have no legal recourse? Well, Rodriguez said carefully, there may be some options we haven't explored yet. Tell me more about your mother's estate. Were you named in her will? I explained that Mom had left everything to Dad, with the understanding that he'd take care of me. Rodriguez made notes as I spoke, occasionally nodding or asking for clarification. There's something else, Rodriguez said, lowering his voice. I probably shouldn't tell you this, but I've been concerned about your father's recent activities. He came in last month asking about transferring assets and updating his will. Some of his requests seemed unusual. What kind of unusual? I asked. Rodriguez hesitated. He wanted to know about hiding assets from potential claims, and he asked about removing you from inheriting anything if something happened to him. At the time, I advised against it, but now I'm wondering if there's a larger pattern of financial manipulation here. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a business card. Cassie, I want you to contact this investigator. Her name is Sharon Wells, and she specializes in financial fraud cases. I think you should have someone look into your father's assets and recent transactions. There might be irregularities that give you leverage. You think Dad is committing fraud? I asked. I think your father may have been less than truthful about several things, Rodriguez said diplomatically. And I think you deserve to know the full extent of what's been going on. That afternoon, I called Sharon Wells and explained my situation. She agreed to meet with me the next day to discuss a preliminary investigation into Dad's finances. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like someone was taking my concerns seriously. But my relief was short-lived. When I got home from the lawyer's office, I discovered that my problems were about to get much worse. Dad was waiting for me in the living room with a stack of papers and an angry expression I'd never seen before. Where were you today, Cassie? I had some errands to run, I said, not wanting to reveal my legal consultations. Errands, Dad repeated. Is that what we're calling visits to lawyers now? My blood ran cold. How did you? Harold Rodriguez called me, Dad said, his voice cold. Apparently, my daughter has been telling people that I'm committing fraud. That I'm stealing from her. Do you have any idea how embarrassing that phone call was? I realized that Mr. Rodriguez had felt obligated to inform Dad about my visit, probably to protect himself legally. My attempt to find help had backfired spectacularly. Dad, I was just trying to understand my rights, I said. Your rights? Dad stood up, towering over me in a way that suddenly seemed threatening. Your rights ended when you became an adult, Cassie. You have the right to find your own place to live, get your own job, and stop depending on other people to take care of you. He handed me the stack of papers he'd been holding. Since you want to involve lawyers, here are some legal documents for you to consider. Patricia thinks we've been too generous with our 30-day timeline. The first document was a revised eviction notice, giving me only 2 weeks to vacate the property. The second was a bill for back rent totaling $48,000, representing what Dad claimed was fair market rent for the past 4 years. The third document made my knees weak. It was a restraining order application, claiming that I'd been threatening and harassing him. Dad, this is insane, I said, staring at the papers. I've never threatened you. Haven't you? Dad asked. Just yesterday, you accused me of stealing from you. Today, you told a lawyer that I'm committing fraud. Patricia thinks these accusations constitute harassment, and I'm starting to agree with her. I realized that Patricia had been coaching Dad on how to turn my legitimate concerns into evidence of my supposed mental instability. They were systematically destroying my credibility while positioning themselves as the victims of my unreasonable behavior. If you file this restraining order, where am I supposed to live? I asked. Dad shrugged. That's not my problem anymore, Cassie. You're an adult. Figure it out. That night, as I lay in bed trying to process how quickly my life had unraveled, I realized that Dad and Patricia had been planning this character assassination for months. Every conversation, every interaction had been designed to build a case against me while protecting their own interests. But they'd made one crucial error in their calculations. They'd assumed that the daughter they'd manipulated for so long would continue to be passive and accepting of whatever they decided to do to her. They had no idea that I was about to stop playing defense and start playing offense in a way that would change everything. Despite my growing anger and determination to fight back, part of me still hoped that my father might come to his senses. The man who'd raised me couldn't possibly be as cruel and calculating as he'd seemed over the past few days. Maybe Patricia was manipulating him, and if I could reach the real dad underneath her influence, we could still work something out. With that naive hope still flickering, I asked Dad if we could meet for coffee at our old favorite diner to discuss the situation calmly, away from Patricia's influence. To my surprise, he agreed to meet me there Saturday morning. "But I'm bringing Patricia," he added. "She has a right to be part of any discussion about our future." I should have known then that this meeting would be another disaster, but I desperately wanted to believe that my father still existed somewhere beneath the stranger he'd become. Saturday morning at Bennett's Diner, I arrived early and chose a quiet booth in the back, hoping we could have a private conversation. But when Dad and Patricia walked in together, I could tell immediately that this wasn't going to be the reconciliation I'd hoped for. Patricia was dressed in an expensive outfit that probably cost more than I made in 2 weeks, carrying a designer purse that could have paid my restaurant wages for a month. Dad looked proud walking beside her, like she was some kind of trophy he'd won. They slid into the booth across from me, Patricia immediately pulling out her phone. "I hope you don't mind," Patricia said with a fake smile, "but I want to record this conversation. For legal purposes, you understand." "Legal purposes?" I asked, confused. "Well, given your recent behavior," Dad said, "Patricia thinks we should document any interactions we have with you. Just to protect ourselves." I should have left then, but I was still clinging to the hope that I could reason with him. "Dad, I just want us to work this out like a family. Can't we figure out some compromise that works for everyone?" Patricia laughed, a sound that carried across the entire diner. "Oh honey, this isn't a negotiation. We're here to tell you exactly what's going to happen, not to listen to what you want." Several other diners turned to look at us, and I felt my face burning with embarrassment. "Can we please keep our voices down?" "Why?" Patricia asked loudly. "Are you ashamed of something?" "Because you should be ashamed, living off your father like a parasite for all these years." "Patricia, please," I said, my voice getting smaller as more people stared. But Dad didn't tell Patricia to lower her voice or show any concern for my comfort. Instead, he began what felt like a prepared speech, delivered loud enough for half the diner to hear. "Cassie," Dad said, his voice carrying across the restaurant, "Patricia and I have been talking about your situation, and we've decided that you need to hear some hard truths about yourself." I glanced around nervously as nearby conversations stopped and people began openly staring at our table. "Dad, maybe we should discuss this privately." "No," Patricia interrupted, her voice even louder than before. "You need to hear this in public so you can't twist our words later like you did with that lawyer." What happened next was the most humiliating experience of my life. Dad began listing what he called my failures and mistakes in a voice loud enough for the entire diner to hear. He talked about my dead-end jobs, my inability to maintain relationships, my financial irresponsibility, and my emotional instability. "She's 29 years old and still living with her father," Dad announced to anyone within earshot. "She's never had a serious boyfriend, never finished college, and never learned how to take care of herself." Patricia nodded along enthusiastically, occasionally adding her own commentary. "Robert has been too kind to you for too long. Most fathers would have kicked you out years ago." I tried to keep my voice low and reasonable. "Dad, these aren't fair characterizations of my situation. I've been working to support our household because I thought you needed help." "Support our household?" Dad asked, his voice rising even higher. "Cassie, you've been a financial burden on me since you turned 18. Every month, I have to supplement what you contribute because it's not enough to actually cover our expenses." The lies were so blatant and delivered so confidently that I almost doubted my own memories. But I knew exactly how much I'd been paying, and it was far more than enough to cover our actual household expenses. That's not true, Dad, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I've been paying more than the mortgage amount every month. Patricia leaned forward, her voice dripping with condescension. Honey, mortgage payments aren't the only household expenses. There's maintenance, insurance, property taxes, utilities, food, cleaning supplies, and a dozen other things you probably never even thought about. She was making me sound like a naive child who didn't understand basic household finances, and she was doing it in front of an audience of strangers who were hanging on every word. And let's talk about your other issues, Dad continued, as if he was reading from a prepared list. The drinking problem you think we don't know about. The prescription pills you've been stealing from my medication bottles. The money you've been taking from my wallet when you think I'm not looking. I stared at him in shock. Every single accusation was completely false. I rarely drank alcohol, had never stolen medication from anyone, and had never taken money from his wallet. But he was stating these lies as facts in front of a room full of strangers. Dad, none of that is true, I said, but my voice was shaking and I'm sure I sounded guilty to anyone listening. Oh, we have evidence, Patricia said, pulling out her phone and showing me what appeared to be video footage. Robert installed security cameras last month because things kept going missing from the house. The video was clearly edited and taken out of context, but it showed me in what looked like compromising situations. One clip showed me in Dad's bedroom, where I'd been searching through his papers. Another showed me in the kitchen late at night, reaching into what might have been his wallet but was actually my own purse. This is ridiculous, I said, but I could see that the other diners were now looking at me with suspicion and disapproval. Patricia continued her performance, describing me as unstable, manipulative, and potentially dangerous. She mentioned the threats I'd supposedly made against Dad, the lies I'd told the lawyer about his finances, and the harassment I'd been subjecting them to since they'd announced their engagement. We're scared of her, Patricia said, actually managing to make her voice sound trembling and vulnerable. Robert thinks she might hurt us if we don't give her what she wants. By the time they finished their public assassination of my character, the entire diner was staring at me with a mixture of pity and disgust. I'd been painted as a delusional, addicted, financially irresponsible loser who was threatening an elderly man and his innocent fiancée. That's why we're filing for a restraining order, Dad announced to the room. We can't have someone this unstable living in our home. I realized then that this entire meeting had been planned as a performance, designed to create witnesses to my supposed instability while making Dad and Patricia look like reasonable people dealing with a difficult situation. Patricia had been recording everything, probably planning to use edited clips to support their legal case against me. I stood up to leave, my face burning with humiliation and my hands shaking with rage. As I walked toward the door, I heard Patricia's voice behind me, loud enough for everyone to hear. I hope she gets the help she needs before she hurts someone. The drive home was a blur of tears and rage. Not only had they destroyed my reputation in front of strangers, they'd created what looked like evidence of my supposed mental instability. The edited videos, the public testimony of witnesses, the recorded conversation, it all added up to a case that would be difficult for me to refute. When I got home, I discovered that my humiliation was far from over. Patricia had uploaded edited clips of our diner conversation to several social media platforms, along with commentary about dealing with unstable family members and protecting elderly parents from adult children who refuse to grow up. The videos went viral in our small town within hours. My phone started buzzing with notifications as friends, coworkers, and acquaintances began commenting on the posts. Most of the comments were supportive of Dad and Patricia, expressing sympathy for them having to deal with such a difficult situation. By Sunday evening, the videos had been shared hundreds of times and viewed by thousands of people. My boss at the restaurant called to tell me that customers had been asking about that crazy girl from the viral video and suggested I take a few days off until the situation died down. I don't want to fire you, my boss said, but this kind of negative attention isn't good for business. I realized that Patricia had successfully destroyed my local reputation and threatened my employment, all while making herself and Dad look like the victims of my supposed instability. But as I sat in my room that night, watching my life crumble around me, I realized that Patricia had also made a crucial mistake. In her eagerness to humiliate me, she'd created a public record of her manipulation tactics. And if I was clever enough, I might be able to use her own methods against her. By Monday morning, my life had reached what felt like rock bottom. I'd lost my weekend restaurant job due to the viral video scandal, and my coworkers at my day job were treating me with a mixture of pity and suspicion. The edited videos made me look genuinely unstable, and Patricia's social media campaign had convinced most of our town that I was a dangerous person who'd been taking advantage of my poor, innocent father. I spent that week staying with my coworker Jennifer, sleeping on her couch and trying to figure out what to do next. Jennifer was one of the few people who'd known me long enough to realize that the viral videos didn't match the person she knew, but even she seemed unsure about what to believe. "Cassie," Jennifer said gently one evening, "I'm not judging you, but maybe you should consider that your dad and his fiancée have some valid points. Maybe it is time for you to become more independent." Even my closest friend was starting to doubt me, influenced by Patricia's carefully crafted narrative. I felt completely alone, like everyone I'd ever trusted had turned against me or abandoned me. The worst part was the constant self-doubt. Patricia's psychological manipulation had been so thorough that I sometimes found myself wondering if I really was the problem. Maybe I had been taking advantage of Dad's generosity. Maybe I was too dependent and needed to grow up. Maybe this whole situation was my fault for not being a better daughter. It was during this lowest point that I considered just giving up entirely. I thought about leaving town, changing my name, and starting over somewhere far away where no one knew about the viral videos or the family drama. Part of me wanted to disappear completely and let Dad and Patricia have their perfect life together. But Jennifer, despite her doubts about the situation, encouraged me to fight back instead of running away. "Even if some of what they're saying is true," Jennifer said, "that doesn't excuse the way they're treating you. And some of this stuff doesn't add up, Cassie. I've known you for 3 years, and you're not the person those videos make you out to be." Jennifer's words reminded me that I wasn't the helpless victim Patricia wanted me to believe I was. I'd been so focused on being a good daughter that I'd forgotten I could also be a strong woman who fought for herself. That's when I decided to stop playing defense and start playing offense. My first step was to begin documenting everything systematically. I created detailed timelines of Dad's deception, organized all my photographic evidence, and wrote down every conversation I could remember. I also started recording any interactions I had with Dad or Patricia, just as Patricia had been recording me. Jennifer helped me research Patricia's background online, and what we discovered was eye-opening. Patricia wasn't just a manipulative woman who'd targeted my father. She had a pattern of behavior that suggested this wasn't her first time pulling this kind of scheme. We found her previous social media accounts under slightly different names, showing relationships with several older men over the past 10 years. In each case, the relationship seemed to follow a similar pattern. Patricia would move in with a widowed or divorced man, isolate him from his family, and then disappear after accessing his assets. Most disturbing was a newspaper article from Florida about a man named Charles Watson who died suddenly after changing his will to leave everything to his caregiver Patricia Williams. The article mentioned that Watson's children had contested the will, claiming their father had been manipulated, but the case had been settled out of court. "Cassie," Jennifer said, staring at the article, "I think your stepmother-to-be might be a professional con artist." That revelation led me to contact Charles Watson's daughter through social media. Linda Watson agreed to speak with me by phone, and her story was terrifyingly similar to mine. "Patricia moved in with my father 6 months after our mother died," Linda explained. "She convinced him that we kids were only interested in his money, and gradually turned him against us. By the time we realized what was happening, he'd changed his will and given her power of attorney." "What happened to your father?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. He died of what the doctors called natural causes, Linda said quietly. Heart attack. But he'd been healthy as a horse before Patricia came along. She immediately collected his life insurance and sold his house. By the time we could challenge anything legally, she'd disappeared with over $400,000. Linda put me in touch with 2 other families who'd had similar experiences with women who matched Patricia's description and methods. The pattern was always the same: target older men with assets, isolate them from their families, gain control of their finances, and then either disappear with the money or wait for the man to die and inherit everything. Armed with this information, I contacted Sharon Wells, the investigator Mr. Rodriguez had recommended. Wells was fascinated by the pattern we'd uncovered and agreed to investigate Patricia's background more thoroughly. Cases like this are more common than people realize, Wells explained. These predators specifically target older men who are vulnerable due to loss or loneliness. They're experts at psychological manipulation and legal maneuvering. Wells also helped me understand that what Dad was doing to me, regardless of Patricia's influence, constituted financial exploitation under state law. The fact that he deceived me about his assets while accepting my financial support could be prosecuted as fraud. The question, Wells said, is whether you want to pursue criminal charges or try to resolve this civilly. Criminal charges would put your father in jail, but civil action might get you compensation for what you've lost. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I had options beyond just accepting whatever Dad and Patricia decided to do to me. I wasn't helpless, and I wasn't alone. There were legal remedies for what they'd done, and there were ways to fight back against their manipulation. But before I could decide on my next steps, I needed to gather more evidence. And that meant going back to playing the role of the defeated daughter while secretly building the case that would destroy Patricia's plans and expose Dad's deception. The woman who'd been crying on Jennifer's couch just days earlier was gone. In her place was someone who understood exactly how dangerous her opponents were and exactly what she needed to do to beat them at their own game. Over the next 2 weeks, I transformed from a victim into a strategic opponent. Working with investigator Sharon Wells and the other families who'd been victimized by Patricia, I developed a comprehensive plan to expose the entire scheme before it could be completed. The first part of my strategy involved playing the role Patricia and Dad expected me to play, the defeated daughter who was finally accepting her fate. I called Dad and asked if we could have one final family dinner before I moved out, explaining that I wanted to apologize for my behavior and ask for his forgiveness. I've been thinking about what you and Patricia said at the diner, I told him over the phone, making sure to sound appropriately contrite. Maybe you're right that I've been too dependent on you. I want to make things right between us before I leave. Dad sounded pleased and slightly smug. I'm glad you're finally seeing things clearly, Cassie. Patricia will be happy to hear that you're being reasonable about this. We arranged to meet for dinner at the house on Friday evening. I knew Patricia would be there, which was exactly what I wanted. I needed both of them present for what I had planned. During the days leading up to the dinner, I worked with Sharon Wells to set up the technical aspects of my plan. Wells provided me with professional-grade recording equipment that was virtually undetectable, along with coaching on how to guide conversations toward admissions of guilt. The key, Wells explained, is to make them think they've won. People are most likely to reveal their true intentions when they believe they're safe from consequences. I also spent time researching the legal details of their scheme with help from Linda Watson and the other victims. We discovered that Patricia's pattern involved not just emotional manipulation, but also specific legal maneuvers designed to transfer assets quickly and irreversibly. In my father's case, Linda explained, Patricia had him sign papers that he thought were insurance documents, but were actually power of attorney transfers. By the time we realized what had happened, she had legal control over everything. That revelation led me to investigate what papers Dad might have already signed. When I searched through his documents again, I found several legal forms that I hadn't noticed during my first investigation. The documents were complex and filled with legal language, but when I showed them to Sharon Wells, she immediately identified them as asset transfer agreements. Your father has already signed papers giving Patricia significant control over his finances, Wells explained. These documents become effective immediately upon marriage. The moment they say I do, she'll have legal access to everything he owns. That discovery added urgency to my plans. I couldn't wait months for a slow legal process to unfold. If Patricia and Dad got married, she'd have what she wanted, and it would be much harder to recover anything through the courts. The most shocking discovery came when Sharon Wells traced the history of the house sale. The buyer listed on the contract, Franklin Mitchell Properties LLC, was indeed a company owned by Uncle Frank. But further investigation revealed that Uncle Frank was planning to immediately resell the property to Patricia for a fraction of the agreed price. This isn't just a family conspiracy, Wells explained. It's a systematic scheme to defraud you of your rightful inheritance while making it look legal. The plan was elegant in its cruelty. Dad would sell the house to Frank for $980,000, claiming he needed to liquidate assets for his retirement. Frank would then sell it to Patricia for $300,000, claiming he needed quick cash for his own financial emergency. Patricia would gain ownership of a nearly $1 million property for a fraction of its value, while Dad would appear to have no control over the transaction. By the time any legal challenge could work its way through the courts, Wells said, Patricia would own the house outright, and your father would claim he had no idea about Frank's subsequent sale. Armed with all this information, I felt prepared for Friday's dinner. But I also knew I needed backup plans in case something went wrong. Jennifer agreed to wait in her car outside the house during the dinner, ready to call police if I didn't check in with her every 30 minutes. I also prepared a comprehensive dossier of evidence to send to the district attorney's office if my plan succeeded in getting the confessions I needed. The package included financial records, witness statements from Patricia's other victims, evidence of the fraudulent house sale scheme, and documentation of the psychological manipulation campaign. Friday evening arrived with perfect timing for my purposes. Dad and Patricia were both relaxed and confident, clearly believing they'd won their war against me. Dad had even bought champagne to celebrate what he called our new beginning. I'm so glad you've finally come to your senses, Patricia said as we sat down to dinner. Robert was worried you might do something drastic, but I told him you'd eventually see reason. I've been thinking about everything you said, I replied, keeping my voice humble and defeated. I realize I've been unfair to both of you. I never considered how hard it must have been for Dad to support me all these years. Dad practically glowed with satisfaction. It hasn't been easy, sweetheart, but I've tried to be patient with you. I know losing your mother was hard, and I wanted to give you time to grow up. As the evening progressed, I carefully guided the conversation toward topics that would reveal the extent of their deception. I asked innocent-sounding questions about their future plans, their financial situation, and their timeline for marriage. We're actually moving much faster than we originally planned, Patricia admitted, clearly feeling safe enough to share details. Robert and I have decided to get married next month instead of waiting until summer. That's wonderful, I said, hiding my alarm behind a smile. What changed your minds? Dad and Patricia exchanged a look that was filled with meaning I wasn't supposed to understand. Well, Dad said carefully, there are some financial advantages to making it official sooner rather than later. Tax implications and such. I nodded as if I understood, but pressed for more details. I don't know much about that stuff. How does getting married help with taxes? Patricia laughed, clearly feeling superior to my supposed ignorance. Oh honey, there are so many financial benefits to marriage that single people don't realize. Joint ownership of assets, inheritance rights, medical decision-making authority. Once Robert and I are married, I'll be able to help him manage his finances much more efficiently. That sounds really smart, I said, though inside I was recording every word of their admissions. As the champagne flowed and their guard dropped further, Dad and Patricia began revealing details about their scheme that went far beyond what I'd already discovered. They talked about how they'd researched the legal requirements for asset transfers, how they'd planned the timeline to avoid potential challenges from me, and how they'd coordinated with Uncle Frank to make the house sale look legitimate. The beauty of this whole arrangement, Patricia explained, clearly enjoying her moment of triumph, is that everything we're doing is technically legal. You can't sue someone for selling their own house or for getting married. And Frank's purchase offer was completely legitimate, Dad added. The fact that he might choose to resell the property later is his own business decision. They were so confident in their victory that they began mocking my attempts to fight back. Patricia pulled out her phone and showed Dad some of the comments on her viral videos, laughing at the people who'd criticized my behavior. "Look at this one," she said, reading from her screen. "That girl needs serious therapy. And this one, her poor father deserves better after everything he's done for her." Dad laughed along with her mockery. "You really did a number on her reputation with those videos. I don't think anyone in town will take her seriously if she tries to cause trouble for us." "That was the whole point," Patricia said proudly. "Destroy her credibility before she can expose our plans. By the time she figures out what we're really doing, no one will believe her." As they continued drinking and celebrating, they revealed the final piece of their scheme that I hadn't known about. Patricia had already prepared divorce papers to be filed immediately after Dad's death, ensuring that she'd inherit everything as his widow without having to actually remain married to him for years. "I mean, I like Robert," Patricia said with casual cruelty, "but I'm not planning to spend my retirement years taking care of an old man. Once I have legal access to his assets, I can start planning my exit strategy." Dad didn't seem bothered by Patricia's admission that she planned to abandon him. If anything, he seemed impressed by her strategic thinking. "You're a smart woman," he told her with genuine admiration. "Smarter than Cassie ever was." By the end of the evening, I had recordings of them admitting to financial fraud, conspiracy, intentional defamation, and elder abuse. I also had evidence of their specific timeline and methods, which would allow law enforcement to intervene before the scheme could be completed. But most importantly, I'd learned that I was dealing with people who were far more calculating and cruel than I'd ever imagined. This wasn't just about money or property. It was about two predators who enjoyed destroying other people's lives as much as they enjoyed profiting from their destruction. As I said goodnight and thanked them for their honesty and patience with me, I knew that I'd gathered everything I needed to destroy their plans completely. The daughter they'd dismissed as weak and stupid was about to demonstrate exactly how dangerous an underestimated opponent could be. Monday morning, I walked into the district attorney's office with Sharon Wells and a comprehensive file containing every piece of evidence we'd gathered over the past month. The recordings from Friday's dinner were the final pieces of a puzzle that clearly showed a pattern of financial fraud, conspiracy, and elder abuse. District Attorney Michelle Torres listened to portions of the recordings with an expression that grew more serious with each revelation. When Patricia's voice came through the speakers describing her exit strategy for abandoning Dad after gaining access to his assets, Torres stopped the playback. "Ms. Mitchell," Torres said, "what you've uncovered here appears to be a systematic scheme that goes far beyond a family dispute. This woman has potentially committed multiple felonies across several states." Torres immediately assigned Detective Ray Gonzalez to coordinate with law enforcement agencies in Florida and Texas, where Patricia had apparently victimized other families. Within hours, investigators were reviewing cold case files involving unexplained deaths of wealthy widowers and the mysterious disappearances of their assets. But our first priority was stopping the immediate threat to Dad's safety and assets. Torres obtained emergency court orders freezing all of Dad's accounts and placing a hold on the house sale pending investigation of the fraud allegations. Tuesday morning, Detective Gonzalez and two other officers arrived at Dad's house with search warrants and arrest warrants. I watched from Sharon Wells' car as they executed the warrants, knowing that Dad and Patricia were about to discover that their perfect plan had been completely exposed. According to Detective Gonzalez's later report, Dad answered the door in his bathrobe, clearly not expecting any visitors. When the detective explained that they were there to investigate financial fraud allegations, Dad initially tried to deny everything. "This is ridiculous," Dad apparently said. "My daughter has been making false accusations because she's upset about having to move out." But when Detective Gonzalez played portions of Friday's dinner conversation, Dad's demeanor changed completely. The recording of his own voice admitting to deceiving me about his financial situation was undeniable evidence of fraud. Patricia's reaction was even more dramatic. When officers informed her that she was being arrested in connection with multiple fraud investigations across 3 states, she immediately tried to blame everything on Dad. "I was just trying to help Robert manage his finances," she claimed. "I had no idea he was deceiving his daughter about his assets." But the evidence painted a clear picture of Patricia as the mastermind behind a scheme that had been carefully planned and executed over many months. Her laptop contained detailed research about Dad's financial situation, including information she could only have obtained through deceptive means. More damning was the discovery of similar research files about other elderly men in the area. Patricia had apparently been planning multiple schemes simultaneously, targeting several potential victims in case her relationship with Dad didn't work out as planned. Uncle Frank's arrest was almost anticlimactic. When officers arrived at his house with evidence of the fraudulent property purchase scheme, he immediately confessed to his role in the conspiracy. Frank claimed he'd been pressured by Dad and Patricia to participate, but the evidence suggested he'd been an eager participant who stood to profit significantly from the arrangement. "I never thought it would go this far," Frank told investigators, though his own recorded conversations with Dad suggested otherwise. The most shocking discovery came when investigators searched Patricia's belongings and found forged documents purporting to give her medical power of attorney over Dad. The forms had been designed to look like routine medical insurance paperwork, but would have given Patricia the legal right to make life and death decisions about Dad's healthcare. Detective Gonzalez later told me that finding those documents probably saved Dad's life. Based on Patricia's pattern with previous victims, investigators believed she would have used the medical power of attorney to deny Dad necessary medical care if he'd become inconvenient or if she'd gained access to his assets through other means. Wednesday brought the court hearings that would determine the immediate consequences of their crimes. Dad, Patricia, and Uncle Frank all appeared before Judge Sarah Hampton to hear the charges against them and learn about their bail conditions. Dad was charged with financial exploitation, conspiracy to commit fraud, and making false statements to law enforcement. Patricia faced the same charges plus additional counts related to identity theft, forgery, and her activities in other states. Uncle Frank was charged with conspiracy and money laundering. During the bail hearing, Patricia's lawyer tried to argue that she'd been manipulated by Dad and Frank, claiming she was another victim of their scheme. But Prosecutor Torres presented evidence showing Patricia's extensive criminal history and her pattern of targeting vulnerable elderly men. "Your Honor," Torres argued, Ms. Patricia Williams, who has also used the names Patricia Watson, Patricia Johnson, and Patricia Davis, is a flight risk with a documented history of financial predations spanning at least 8 years. We have evidence connecting her to similar schemes in Florida, Texas, and Georgia. Judge Hampton set Patricia's bail at $500,000, effectively ensuring she'd remain in custody pending trial. Dad's bail was set at $50,000, which he couldn't pay due to the freeze on his assets. Uncle Frank was released on his own recognizance after agreeing to cooperate with the investigation. The media coverage of the arrests was extensive, particularly given the viral nature of Patricia's videos attacking my character. Local news stations ran stories about the con artist couple and their elaborate scheme to defraud an innocent daughter. Reporter Jennifer Martinez from Channel 8 News interviewed me for a segment about financial elder abuse. "This case demonstrates how sophisticated these predators can be," Martinez said during the broadcast. "They don't just steal money. They systematically destroy families and manipulate their victims' relationships with loved ones." Watching the news coverage was surreal. Just weeks earlier, I'd been portrayed as an unstable daughter taking advantage of her poor father. Now the narrative had completely reversed, with Dad and Patricia being described as calculating criminals who'd victimized me and potentially many others. The house sale was permanently cancelled, and the court appointed a temporary guardian to manage Dad's assets while the legal proceedings continued. The guardian's first action was to order a complete audit of Dad's finances to determine exactly how much money Patricia had already obtained through her manipulation. The audit revealed that Patricia had convinced Dad to give her access to several accounts containing over $90,000, money that had mysteriously disappeared during the past 6 months. Investigators traced the funds to accounts Patricia had opened under false names, apparently building a nest egg for her planned disappearance after Dad's death. By Friday of that week, my entire life had been transformed. The house I'd thought I was losing was secure under court protection. The father who'd betrayed me was facing serious criminal charges. The woman who'd tried to destroy my reputation was sitting in jail awaiting trial on multiple felony counts. But perhaps most importantly, I'd discovered that I was far stronger and more resourceful than I'd ever imagined. The helpless victim Patricia and Dad had tried to create had become the architect of their complete downfall. 6 months later, I stood in the courthouse lobby holding a folder containing the final legal documents that would close this chapter of my life forever. Dad had accepted a plea bargain that included full restitution of the money I'd contributed to household expenses, plus additional damages for emotional distress. Patricia was beginning a lengthy prison sentence after being convicted on multiple fraud charges across 4 states. Uncle Frank had received probation and community service in exchange for his cooperation with prosecutors. The legal resolution was satisfying, but the emotional healing had taken much longer. For months after the arrests, I'd struggled with feelings of guilt and sadness about Dad's situation. Despite everything he'd done to me, he was still my father, and watching him face criminal prosecution had been painful. I'd attended therapy sessions to help process the complex emotions surrounding his betrayal and my own role in the family dynamic that had made his deception possible. Dr. Emily Rodriguez helped me understand that my willingness to sacrifice for family wasn't a character flaw, but that I'd need to develop better boundaries to protect myself from future manipulation. What your father and Patricia did to you was a form of psychological abuse, Dr. Rodriguez explained during one of our sessions. They systematically undermined your self-esteem and your perception of reality to make you easier to control. The therapy sessions also helped me deal with the guilt I felt about Dad's imprisonment. Part of me wondered if I could have handled the situation differently, if there had been a way to save our relationship while still protecting myself. You didn't choose to destroy your relationship with your father, Dr. Rodriguez reminded me. You chose to protect yourself from people who were deliberately harming you. Your father's consequences are the result of his own choices, not yours. The house had officially been awarded to me through the court proceedings, with the judge ruling that my years of mortgage payments had created an ownership interest that Dad couldn't legally transfer without my consent. The property had been appraised at $975,000, and I'd decided to sell it and start fresh somewhere new. The sale closed on a beautiful Thursday in October, and I walked away with $820,000 after paying off the remaining mortgage, legal fees, and real estate commissions. It was more money than I'd ever imagined having, and it represented not just financial security, but the freedom to build whatever kind of life I wanted. I'd already decided to move to Denver, where I'd been accepted into a graduate program in business administration. For the first time in my adult life, I'd be able to focus on my own education and career without worrying about supporting anyone else. But I also wanted to use my experience to help other people who might be facing similar situations. Working with Sharon Wells and the other families who'd been victimized by Patricia, I'd established a non-profit organization called Family Justice Alliance. Our mission was to educate families about financial elder abuse and provide resources for people dealing with manipulation and fraud. Your case has already helped us identify and stop 3 other schemes, Sharon told me as we met to discuss the non-profit's first-year plans. The information you gathered about Patricia's methods has become a model for training law enforcement officers to recognize these patterns. Linda Watson, whose father had been one of Patricia's earlier victims, had agreed to serve as the organization's president. Together, we developed educational materials and support groups for families dealing with financial abuse and manipulation. I wish something like this had existed when my family was going through our crisis, Linda said during our organizational meeting. Maybe we could have saved my father if we'd known what signs to look for. The nonprofit work was incredibly fulfilling, but I also made sure to prioritize my own healing and growth. I'd started dating someone I'd met through graduate school orientation, a kind and honest man named David who couldn't have been more different from the manipulative people I'd dealt with during my family crisis. I admire how you turned such a terrible experience into something that helps other people, David told me one evening as we walked through downtown Denver. But I also want to make sure you're not so focused on helping others that you forget to take care of yourself. His concern was touching and showed me how different healthy relationships could be from the toxic dynamics I'd experienced with Dad and Patricia. David respected my boundaries, supported my goals, and never tried to make me feel guilty for prioritizing my own well-being. I'd also reconnected with some extended family members who'd been influenced by Dad's lies during the height of the crisis. Several cousins and family friends had reached out to apologize after learning the truth about what had happened. We should have questioned your father's stories, my cousin Marie admitted during a phone call. Some of the things he told us about you never made sense, but we didn't want to get involved in family drama. The apologies helped, but they also taught me an important lesson about how easily manipulation could succeed when people chose to remain passive bystanders. As I sat in my new apartment in Denver, looking out at the Rocky Mountains and planning my future, I reflected on how completely my life had changed since that night when I'd overheard Dad's phone conversation. The frightened, confused woman who'd discovered her father's betrayal had been replaced by someone who understood her own strength and refused to accept mistreatment from anyone. The money from the house sale had given me financial security, but the real treasure was the knowledge that I could survive betrayal, fight back against injustice, and build a life based on my own values rather than other people's expectations. I still thought about Dad sometimes, wondering how he was adjusting to life without Patricia's manipulation. He'd written me a few letters from prison, attempting to apologize and asking for forgiveness. I wasn't ready to respond yet, but I'd kept the letters, thinking that someday I might be emotionally prepared for that conversation. My phone buzzed with a text message from Jennifer, who'd remained a loyal friend throughout the entire ordeal. Saw the news story about your nonprofit. So proud of you. When are you coming to visit? I smiled and typed back, planning a trip home for Thanksgiving. Can't wait to catch up. The word home felt different now. The house I'd grown up in was no longer my home, and the family I'd thought I belonged to had been revealed as a lie. But I'd learned that home wasn't a place or a set of relationships defined by blood. Home was wherever I felt safe, valued, and free to be authentically myself. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, I felt a deep sense of peace about the choices I'd made. The path from victim to victor hadn't been easy, but it had taught me that I was capable of far more than I'd ever imagined. Have you ever had to fight for what was rightfully yours, even when it meant standing up to family members? Have you seen someone you love get manipulated by someone with bad intentions? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Please like this video if my story resonated with you, subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming family betrayal, and share this with anyone who might be facing a similar situation. Remember that you're stronger than you know, and you deserve relationships based on honesty and respect. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it encourages you to never give up fighting for your own truth and dignity.